Good morning and welcome to episode 7 of the Green Transport Recovery web series. I'm Daniel Simpson from Landor, and I have the great pleasure of introducing today's event that will look at the newly launched Rapid Cycleway Prioritisation Tool. Many thanks to the DFT for supporting the organisation of this event. This is the first of 2 webinars organised with the DFT relating to the Emergency Active Travel Fund, with the second taking place next Wednesday. That's the 24th of June, a week today. And that event will look at the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit, or AMAT, led by Fraser Quelch at DFT. Registration details can be found on transportextra.com, and you'll also be circulated to all attendees after this broadcast comes to a close. Today's event has been really popular. We've had well over 500 registrations. I think there's close to 300 already live now. So hello to everyone, wherever you are. Today's speakers, we have first up Rupert Furness, Deputy Director, Active and Accessible Travel at the DFT. Rupert will be providing an event introduction and setting the policy context. Next, we will have Jeremy Clark, Economic Advisor of the Active and Accessible Travel Department at DFT. Jeremy will speak about the rationale for commissioning the tool. And then the technical kind of segment of the event will include presentations from Robin Lovelace, Associate Professor in Transport Data Science at University of Leeds. Robin will give a detailed overview of the results of the tool and how they've been estimated. And finally, we've got Brian Deegan. He's a design engineer at Urban Movement. Brian, he will be giving the user experience perspective. And then in the final segment, we've got Q&A. And so we do ask that any attendees add your questions to the question box in your browser. Dr. Joey Talbot, who's a research fellow at the University of Leeds, will be helping to facilitate the questions. He'll be going through the questions as they come in and filtering them and then presenting them to the panelists at the end. If we don't have enough time to answer all your questions, we will attempt to do so afterwards via email. You can also use Twitter. That hashtag there is Green Transport Recovery. Excellent. So we're ready to go now. I'm going to pass over to Rupert to kick things off. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and a very good morning to all of you. Apologies that you can't see me. I'm speaking via my phone rather than the laptop as a result of IT challenges, but hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear. And I'm joining you from West Malling in Kent today, which is where I live. So a general word, first of all, about the sort of policy landscape. I would say there has never been a time when there has been so much interest from ministers in the cycling and walking agenda. We have a huge opportunity to make some real progress at the moment. As I'm sure you'll all be aware, we've seen some big increases, particularly in cycling in recent months, as people cycle as their sort of daily exercise, as well as to increasingly to get to work and so on, now that the economy is starting to open up. The Prime Minister himself is passionate about this agenda. It's a very, very big priority within number 10. Andrew Gilligan, the Prime Minister's Transport Advisor, has been working very, very closely with us on all of the stuff that we're doing at the moment. As you may be aware, the Prime Minister is due to launch a national cycling plan in a few weeks' time, which we've all been hugely busy on. So it's been a bit of a sort of breathless and a hugely busy time for us in the cycling and walking team in DFT, as it no doubt has for many of you too, given the huge interest in this agenda. On the Emergency Active Travel Fund itself, as you will probably all be aware, it was announced on the 9th of May as part of a wider announcement by Grant Shapps, our Secretary of State, of a £2 billion package to to create a new era for cycling and walking. Again, that's hugely significant. That's the largest ever amount of funding sort of committed to active travel. And the Emergency Active Travel Fund is the first element of that overall £2 billion, with its main purpose being to enable local authorities to get on quickly with cycling and walking schemes, particularly those that will help relieve the pressure on public transport. A very real concern that as the economy does open up, buses and trains and so on will have severely reduced capacity. So we need to encourage as many people as possible to cycle and walk as a way of helping to relieve that pressure. The fund itself has been split into two tranches. An initial 20% of the fund we're describing as tranche 1, and then the remaining 80% of the fund as tranche 2. The department wrote to local authorities in late May asking for tranche 1 bids by a very, very tight deadline of the 5th of June, and I do apologise that that deadline was such a tight one. And the letter we sent made clear that new funding was designed to the new funding was designed to support pop-up and temporary interventions to create an environment that is safe for walking and cycling in your area, both to avoid this overcrowding on public transport that I've mentioned, but also to start to embed walking and cycling as part of new long-term commuting habits and lock in some of these positive behaviours and reap the environmental and health and other benefits. The letter was quite prescriptive in terms of what we were asking for from local authorities, in particular this very real sense that what we're looking for is genuine, meaningful plans to reallocate road space to cyclists and pedestrians. And there was a particular line in the letter that anything that doesn't meaningfully alter the status quo on the road will not be funded. I mean, those were unusually strong lines from the department. I think we're making very clear that we do not anymore want to fund things like just white paint on the road for if you like advisory cycle lanes. We're very much looking for real road space allocation, point closures, segregation, all of those sorts of things. Bids were received from all authorities, and the department is currently finalising its assessment of those and hoping to confirm the allocations very shortly. Our working assumption is that will be next week. Generally, there's been a very positive response from authorities. The department is pleased by the level of ambition shown, but the amounts that we published, the indicative amounts per authority, were indicative only. So some authorities will receive less than their allocation where their plans have not met our criteria. Now, we'll be writing to local authorities very soon as well on the second tranche, tranche 2 of the funding. Frankly, the focus of tranche 2 is likely to be very similar to tranche 1, with both temporary interventions and permanent measures in scope. But the much larger scale of funding for tranche 2, 180 million in total, means that we will expect to see more evidence from authorities of things like benefit cost ratios, how schemes have been prioritised, and so on. And that is why tools like the Rapid Cycleway Prioritisation Toolkit are so important and could play a really key role in helping authorities to do that prioritisation and identification of important schemes. So look, that's all I was going to say by way of the kind of very brief overview of the policy context, because I think the real focus of today is on the detail of the tool. So I will hand back, if that's all right, either to Daniel or to the chair, who's I think going to introduce the next speaker. I think we're hoping to hear from Jeremy, but I know that we were having challenges with the IT. But if I just stop talking now and put myself back on mute, if I can either invite Daniel or the chair to take us through to the next speaker.
Thank you, Rupert. That was great. Thanks ever so much. So yeah, I'm going to hand over now to Jeremy Clark from DFT. He's joined us on the phone. So I'm going to pass over to him now. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Daniel, can you hear me? Am I live?
You are, yeah.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming along to this webinar. So as Daniel said, I'm an economist working in public transport, and I've been project managing the Rapid Cycleway Prioritisation Tool. So I don't want to spoil Robin's thunder with all the details of the model, but I wanted to give a quick overview of why we've commissioned it, what I see as the kind of key ways in which it could be helpful to you, then a couple of key caveats that you should be aware of, and then a few kind of closing remarks. As Rupert said, Grant Shapps announced the Emergency Active Travel Fund at the beginning of May. I have been really keen to ensure that that all authorities with indicative funding allocations for the Emergency Active Travel Fund have some evidence to allow them to prioritise how they're going to be investing in prioritise their bids for the Emergency Active Travel Funds. Those areas with local cycling and walking investment plans, obviously already or equivalent, are already at a head start, as they already have these types of plans. So what I was thinking about is for those running authorities that don't have existing cycling and walking investment plans, what evidence tools could we provide that could help them in the process of prioritising what are the kind of key measures that they should be seeking funding for. So we developed this tool on the back of some work that Robin has undertaken for Cycling UK, identifying the best locations for pop-up cycle lanes at 10 cities around the UK. And we've tried to expand on the both the coverage to cover the whole of England, but also expand on the evidence that it can provide. So how can this tool help you? I see it as potentially being helpful in two key ways. Firstly, to provide a starter for 10, where are some of the most promising locations for new cycleways in authorities around the country. So these are new cycleways on roads with spare space. What we're calling spare space is wide roads, or those with more than one lane in given direction. So hopefully these are some of the roads that they're kind of key arterial roads that could accommodate a significant increase in cycling and achieve the department's goal of meaningfully reallocating road space. Secondly, we've done some modelling to identify what we think a cohesive network for cycling might look like. So this is a network joining up those roads with which have the highest cycling potential along them. And potentially this might kind of give a kind of long-term vision of what a really effective road network for encouraging cycling might look like in the long term, including not just cycle lanes, but a whole range of different measures, including sort of permeability or speed limit reductions or other measures to promote active travel. As I mentioned, a couple of key caveats I'm keen to communicate. Firstly, we've developed this tool to complement local knowledge and stakeholder engagement. That we hope that this is a really useful tool to aid the prioritisation process, but inevitably, no model will be able to factor in all of the many local factors which will inform what is right for your given areas. So it's a starter for 10, but not a prescription. Secondly, given we called it the Rapid Cycleway Prioritisation Tool for a reason, because Robin and Joey have taken this from prototype through to full model in 4 weeks, which I think is a stupendous achievement. Necessarily to achieve that in a short time frame has meant the scope is limited. So as I say, we've focused on priority locations for cycleways. The tool doesn't whilst the tool identifies what a cohesive network for cycling might look like, it doesn't identify specific interventions that you might want to undertake in specific places, like filtered permeability or speed limit reductions and so forth. So currently, each area would need to consider the results and think what's suitable in each location. the model doesn't attempt to assess that. Similarly, the model, the scope of the model is focused on cycling and cycling infrastructure. I felt that it was perhaps more straightforward where the locations of new walkways would be, because that would be informed primarily by which areas have seen highest footfall in the recent past. And I felt that there was perhaps a model focusing on cycling would be more informative for people, but I'm keen to get your views if you feel that there's further evidence needed to help prioritise walking investments. Just a couple of concluding remarks. So as I say, my thanks to Robin and Jerry, who've I think delivered an enormous amount in 4 weeks, and I know how hard they've been working. And thanks also to Sestrins for helping to facilitate this project. If you have found the tool useful, then it would be really helpful if you're able to post your experiences on Basecamp to share knowledge. We're also going to be asking, in a couple of months' time, we're going to be sending around a survey asking for your experiences of using the tool and how has this informed your decision making, so we can understand whether this has been helpful for your decision making. That was all I was going to say, Daniel. So unless there are any questions of clarification from that, should we hand over to Robin?
Okay, thanks ever so much, Jeremy. That was great. Okay, so we're now over to Robin to provide the technical side of the presentation. Over to you.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Robin Lovelace, based in North Leeds. I work at the Institute for Transport Studies at the University of Leeds, and I'm leading on the technical rollout of the tool alongside Joey, who's also on the call. As both Rupert and Jeremy said, I'm going to be focused on the detail. So I'm going to explain exactly what the tool is and what it does, and I'm going to do that via a screen share. So hopefully this is going to work. So switching over to screen share. Can you see that screen share now, Daniel?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so the Rapid Cycleway Prioritisation Tool, as has been said already, like many areas of COVID-19 response, have to be done faster than usual timescales, ranging from the development of vaccines all the way to interventions on the transport network to alleviate pressure on the road network. I'm very grateful to Rupert and Jeremy and everyone who's been involved in making this happen. We have been working hard and fast to develop what we think is a useful evidence base that can scale nationally. So we see this very much as an extra tool in the toolbox that can help transport planners make decisions. And Rupert's point about the aim being changes that will affect the status quo is very much at the forefront of our thinking around this tool. Yeah, so in terms of motivations, this slide here just shows the kind of interventions that we're talking about. And the key thing here is that we are looking at road space reallocation. So this is a cycleway in London. I believe it's Park Lane, and you can see that there's buses going alongside that are seemingly almost empty, while you've got higher levels of cycling than before. So this is exactly the kind of intervention that we're looking at. And I think it is worth just zooming in on the question of why might we want to look at road space reallocation schemes in this context. And basically there's three main reasons. Number one, road space reallocation can be done relatively quickly compared with creating entirely new infrastructure from scratch. So you can do it fast, and that is necessary at the moment for various reasons related to COVID-19 response. Secondly, major roads that have spare space tend to be on arterial routes, so they're likely to have high cycling potential, likely to be highly used and carry large numbers of people. And then finally, this is also shown in the photo here, the infrastructure is wide. So the kinds of infrastructure that can be built via road space reallocation schemes through light segregation are wide and usually direct. And that's exactly the kind of infrastructure that we need to take capacity away from the public transport networks, but also to create the long-term changes that Rupert alluded to. So that's something on the motivations underlying this. And another thing to say is that these kinds of interventions are already happening. So this is a map illustration from Leeds City Council, and they have a plan where they've got measures that are already planned and going in the red lines, and in the blue lines there are measures under investigation. And they also have a great example here of a low traffic neighbourhood, which I believe will be the first in Leeds. So that also speaks to Jeremy's point that we need a whole range of interventions going in, but the focus of the Rapid Cycleway Prioritisation Tool is very much the kinds of arterial routes that can have a transformational effect on city transport networks that will change the status quo. So Kirkstall Road out here going to the west is a great example of this. It's a major commuter corridor, it's wide, it's got multiple lanes, and it's the kind of place where you might want to think about the options for road space reallocation. And essentially the tool, you can come up with these plans without use of a tool, but the tool can certainly help inform your thinking. And certainly around, if you've got 2 candidate routes or 5 candidate routes, the tool can definitely start to prioritize, help you prioritize between them. So in terms of the tool itself, there's a number of layers. So you can see various parts of the transport network that are most relevant when you're designing new cycleways on strategic corridors. And a good way to think through the different layers on the tool, I think, is in terms of timescale. So the first layer that we show, or that I'm showing here in terms of time, is if you're going to design new cycleways, obviously you need to think about what your existing network is. So taking the example of Leeds, we do have a cycle network, but like in many cities in the UK, it's not joined up. The quality is variable. So I think it's important to think about the existing network when you're considering putting in new infrastructure, which arterial routes will have the biggest impact in terms of joining up that network. That is a long-term plan that many local authorities will have already a good idea of what that's going to look like in the long term from the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. A few things to say about the detail of this existing cycleway network. So it's only taking off-road cycleways, it's not including painted lines. The data is from OpenStreetMap, so we cannot guarantee 100% accuracy, but it certainly is picking up relatively recent interventions like the Leeds Bradford Cycle Superhighway going out there to the west. We cannot guarantee that the quality of the infrastructure represented in green lines on this map is of sufficient quality. So that's something that you need local knowledge. Don't just rely on this data to say, oh, there's a cycleway there. It's not saying anything about the quality of the infrastructure. The aim of this layer is very much to highlight where gaps need to be filled on the network. So that's the first layer that I would look at in the results. And that represents the past. So this is what's already there. The next layer is probably the most prominent result from the tool, which is these top ranked new cycleways. So this really draws your attention to roads that are promising. And they're promising in the sense that they've got spare space. And by that, we mean roads that either have more than one lane going in either direction, or they have an estimated width of more than 10 meters. The width estimates that we're using aren't highly accurate, so they are just estimated widths. But from the results that we've seen from Leeds and a number of other cities, they certainly do seem to pull out these major roads that are wide enough to put in to put in new cycleways, with a view to them becoming permanent as part of the LSWIP plans, and to get people to transform the status quo on the road networks. So that's really the kind of result that draws your attention quickly to the top routes. And in terms of the speed of interpreting the results, this is designed to be overly simplistic. It's not a complete list of places where you could intervene, but it's a good, for many cities, it's a good kind of starter for 10 on where your key arterial routes are. Another thing to say is that you can rank these roads in various ways, and the number one way that they are ranked is by their cycling potential. So obviously we want to prioritize where we're going to get the biggest boom for our buck in terms of benefit cost ratios, and we've used data from the Propensity to Cycle tool that includes both commuting and estimated travel to school cycling potential under the government target scenario, which represents a doubling in cycling compared with 2011 levels. So that's really the kind of headline result, but there's much more to the tool than that. And you should certainly interpret these results based on an understanding of how the tool works and an understanding of the limitations, some of which Jeremy has already touched on. So I'm going to show that there's also a tabular view of this, and you can see some of the main variables. So it'll give you the name of the road, the reference, the status, and critically the mean cycling potential here for Leeds. I'm going to do a demo using the tool itself, so I'm not going to talk about this tabular result anymore. So as you can see from the previous result, one problem with ranking the continuous road sections above 500 meters that have sufficient width is that it inevitably creates a disjointed network. And the whole point of the LSWIP process is that we are aiming to have a cohesive cycle network. The evidence is clear on this. You can't just design single cycleways and expect that to be enough. You need a joined up network for cycling to grow across the entire city rather than just on particular corridors. And that's where this cohesive network comes in. So just to clarify this layer in the results, which I think is the result that has the greatest potential to be misunderstood. So the way that we identified a cohesive network was we looked at the roads on which there was the highest potential, regardless of how wide the roads were. And then we joined up those roads that had high potential, and that creates a cohesive network. So we're not saying that there's space on these roads, there's excessive space or spare space, but we are saying that if you are able to do other interventions, such as making the roads one way for motor traffic and creating a contraflow or a two-way lane for cycling, or potentially filtered permeability interventions, this network provides an indication of where what that network might look like. And in terms of timescales, this is to start to help guide thinking about the long term. How are the interventions that go in now going to form part of this cohesive network in the long run? There may be parallel roads that are more appropriate. So this again is pulling out fairly big roads, and it's not saying this is the network that you should build, but it gives a kind of idealistic impression of what such a cohesive network could look like. So I think that's an important layer. And in terms of timescales, that's the most long-term layer in the map. There's also two other layers that are hidden by default that you can see in the legend here, and that just shows the data on which we developed our top ranked new cycleways results. So spare lanes and estimated widths are hidden by default, but you can see those if you use the tool. So in terms of how do you use the tool, well, because of the timescales around this and because of feedback that there's to some extent tool overload and we need to make decisions quickly without getting bogged down in very complex tools, simplicity of results was a priority. So we've got a relatively simple map interface, which I'm going to demonstrate. But as you can see, we've got results across all of England. Unfortunately, we haven't done Wales and Scotland because we don't have the data from Wales and Scotland there. In terms of how to use those, I don't need to talk about this because I think Rupert and Jeremy have already touched on it in detail, and Brian Deegan's going to talk about how to translate some of these results into actual infrastructure. But I just want to reinforce the point that the specific aim of this tool is to inform bids for tranche 2 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund. Obviously, you can use the results for other purposes as well, and we are providing the data in the open to inform that may be useful to help inform other schemes as well. But it's got a very specific purpose, focusing on road space reallocation schemes on strategic corridors to inform tranche 2 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund. Something else to say is that this tool is certainly not designed to be used on its own. We expect people will have a wide range of evidence on which they can draw, including local knowledge and stakeholder engagement, and multiple local authorities, including Leeds City Council, have provided maps where people can comment. So there is there is an online mapping system that people are using. So certainly compare the comments on there with the results rather than just using the results from this tool. Something else to say is that there is the results now are on the widenmypath.com web application as well, so people can comment on specific roads. And it's about using the results to inform existing plans as well. So investment isn't just about where the top ranked roads are. You can think of many factors, only some of which will be in the results from the tool. But I certainly think that cycling potential is going to be important. Just remembering that cycling potential in the tool comes from the Propensity to Cycle tool, which uses commuter and school travel. So there are other types of journey that won't be flagged up in the results. And the total length of the infrastructure created, I think, is an important aspect to be taken into account. So in terms of the overview of the results, another thing that to some extent is a limitation of the tool is it works best where you've got lots of data, and you have most data in large cities. And I've got 6 major cities here where I have looked at the results for all of them and had feedback from some people with local knowledge, and it provides the kind of results here. So it certainly gives the indication of where you've got those strategic corridors on major routes. But a limitation associated with this is where you have authorities, large transport authorities such as West Yorkshire Combined Authority, it's going to be dominated, the results are going to be dominated on where you've got the highest potential, which will be the largest city. So that is one caveat with the tool. Another caveat is that the results are most useful in large cities. However, having seen results for smaller cities like Hereford, where I'm from, and Staffordshire, it seems that the results still match to some extent local knowledge there. So that's a bit of an overview of the national scale of the results. And a key finding is that many cities do in fact have large roads with either spare lanes or sufficient width going close to the city centre that could provide candidates for planning these new cycleways. Okay, so that's enough of me talking about the talking to slides. I'm actually going to do a little bit of a live demo. So you can actually see the tool itself and get a feel for how you could use it. So the tool itself is hosted here at the website sipt.bike. That stands for Cycleway Infrastructure Prioritisation Tool, and it does build on this previous tool that was also developed for the Department for Transport, and it gives a bit of an overview. So this is kind of like a user manual for the tool, and it's really worth being aware of all of how it was created and what the limitations are. But once you got through that, you have this national map, and you can click on any of the regions that you are interested in. So in this case, as I'm based in Leeds, I'm going to click on West Yorkshire, and then it creates a new tab that shows you the results for the area that you've clicked on. And you can see here those three layers that I talked about: the existing cycleways in green, the top ranked new cycleways in blue, and the cohesive network in this kind of grey purple colour to show that this is kind of a long-term network. So that's how the tool works, and I'm happy to say that against my instincts as an academic, because academics always try to make things more complicated, we've actually made this tool simpler compared with the propensity to cycle tool and certainly the cycling infrastructure prioritization tool. So there's only 3 layers there, and it's just designed to provide the data in a very easy to use manner. You can change the base map. So if you want to look at a satellite image to actually do a bit of ground truth, for example, you can go on this satellite image and you can look at the propensity to cycle tool overlay. So basically you can overlay these results on various different base maps, and also you can turn layers on or off depending on what you're most interested in. So if you are interested in just looking at the existing cycleways, we can turn off the cohesive network and turn off the routes, and then you will know how well this corresponds to the actual cycle network. And as I said earlier, this doesn't take into account stuff like quiet streets that could be filling up the network in ways that are not shown in this green cycle network for Leeds. So that's an overview of the map-based results. I do want to show this layer that is hidden by default, which is spare lanes. So this is where, according to OpenStreetMap, there are spare lanes, and I can see that Scott Hall Road, which is a dual carriageway going up to the north, is flagged there. So it tends to flag up places where you've got more than one road in one direction, whether or not they have high cycling potential. So I'm going to turn that one off. So you've got quite a range of results to look at, and I want to make the point that it's not just about this single result, the top routes. That's just one component to draw your attention to roads that could be promising for strategic corridor interventions. And then in terms of the tabular results that I mentioned earlier, you've got a whole load of results here, and the number of roads that it can flag depends on the size of your authority. So West Yorkshire is quite a large authority, so there's 50 results here, and we can rank the roads in different ways. So in terms of cycling potential, Headingley Lane is coming up top. In fact, all three of the top three results are this A660 route out to the north, but then it goes down and it shows other roads that have both high cycling potential, a continuous length of more than 500 meters, and spare space, as was defined before. But we can also rank the results in different ways in terms of length multiplied by potential. This just takes the cycling potential and multiplies it by the length of the segment. And that's an interesting measure because that represents the amount of traffic on that route. So the amount of cycling activity estimated from the tool. That's, I think, an interesting one. And obviously that tends to prioritize the longer routes. You can also look at the speed limit on the roads, and you've got the mean estimated width there as well. So although the main result is very simple, you can kind of look at the results in different ways and explore them. And if you want to do your own in-house analysis, you can download the results as a GeoJSON file for each of these key results. So that's a bit of an overview of how the tool works with an example of my hometown of Leeds, and comparing this with the plans that Leeds City Council have put out. I think this can certainly inform thinking and hopefully provides a strong evidence base to support the plans going forward to ensure that the investment that goes in is of maximum long-term use. Of course, we need to think about the limitations of any tool or data set when we're using it. And there's a famous quote that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the same applies for data. No data set is perfect, but certainly we've tried to use the tools, the data sets that are most relevant to this question. So it's got a narrow focus on one part of the solution. So it doesn't say much about where to put low traffic neighborhoods. It doesn't say much about where modal filters may be appropriate. It also is deliberately a simplistic tool to draw your attention to where these strategic corridors may be, and it doesn't contain economic appraisal. And in the seminar next week, there's going to be a talk about the AMAT toolkit that was mentioned earlier. It focuses on the cycleways that come up using our routing algorithm, but there may be parallel routes that are equally viable. So if you've got a parallel route which is actually away from motor traffic, that may be more appropriate. So I think that's an important limitation. And there will certainly be options that are not represented in the top routes. And other key limitations are the road network data is from 2017. So if the road network has changed or OpenStreetMap has issues in some areas, that's a potential limitation. And it only includes work and travel to school trips. So as I mentioned, if you've had lots of new development going on in a particular local authority, it won't be flagging roads to those new developments because it's based on data that's from 2011, which is still a very good proxy for overall travel patterns at city level, but it doesn't pick up on new developments. So that's an overview to the tool. I think it certainly should be used alongside other sources of information, and because it's a free and open tool, you're very welcome to take the data and use it alongside additional sources of evidence that you have. So the good news is there's loads of additional information. This is to a large extent an extension of previous tools. So I worked on the Propensity to Cycle tool with other colleagues from other universities, and I think it very much complements the Propensity to Cycle tool. There's the prototype cycling infrastructure prioritization tool that has additional data sets that may be of use, and just be aware that the results are based on OpenStreetMap data, which has, like any data source, advantages and disadvantages. I did just want to show the user manual. So if you're really interested in this detail, we've got a 10-page technical report that describes it and the kind of thinking behind the methodology. So I recommend taking a look at that for a deeper dive into the methods. So there's loads of links in the slides, which I will share later, and I'm sure will be available. And there's many possibilities for next steps that we could do next, building on this experience, including ways to prioritize low traffic neighborhoods, but that's not something that I'm going to talk about now. So that's it from me, and I'm really excited to pass over to Brian Deegan, who's been quite closely involved with the development of this tool, because early versions of it were used to help inform their interventions in Greater Manchester. So that's it from me. I look forward to any questions as a follow-up, and would like to hand over to Daniel and then Brian.
Yeah, thank you ever so much, Robin. It's a fascinating toolkit, and I'm sure there's lots of councils eagerly waiting to get started to help support their emergency active travel funding. Just before we move on to Brian, I just wanted to apologise. We had some technical issues earlier with Jeremy Clark at the DFT, and I'm aware that the audio was less than perfect. We are going to try and reconnect to Jeremy for the Q&A, but if you could just bear with us whilst we try and sort out these audio gremlins. But yeah, let's move straight on to Brian, and yeah, take it away when you're ready.
Thanks, Daniel. Just wait for the slides to pop up. We got it. Oh, I've got control. Went too fast. There we go. Yeah, so as Robin said, we got involved earlier. I sniffed around that he was working on this and wanted to test it out on the Greater Manchester one. And here's a pop-up lane that's already in place in Trafford on the A56 with the complimentary signs there as well, telling people to use the lanes to save lives, protect the NHS, those kind of positive messages. But really, I want to be a little bit from the engineering view today. But basically, when you look through the cycleway prioritisation tool, you get two things. You get a line, and you get a potential, like the cycling potential, which for me and on the engineering side is like a potential daily flow. So what do you do with those next really? That's really what I've shown in this first process diagram. You kind of have the first bit, you've identified the routes, and you look at the potential usage. And really, as an engineer, you kind of start with like, well, flow's your big one, design speed's another one, but I'm going to concentrate on flow here. So yeah, if we know the flow and the potential use of cyclists, that will dictate, well, how much space do we need to give them? Now, if it's predicting 50 cyclists a day, you might get away with upgrading an existing cycle lane, or you might want to provide space, but generally by taking a lane out of it. Or if you're predicting like 4,000, you might want to think, well, we don't want them all bunched up, and we need space for them to ride safely and social distance. So it should influence your kind of choice. Also, when it comes to like the time as well, which is what I put down at the bottom, if you're putting in a dedicated stage for cyclists, but you're predicting a high flow, you might instantly like go for a minimum stage time of 7 seconds, in which case you might get 7-8 cyclists through, but what do the other 20 do behind queuing? So for me, it's really useful to like define the scope of how we do these things if we know the potential usage. The line on the map, Robin's already talked about like potential deviations as the kind of parallel routes, and I'll put a little bit of a deviation parameter point down below. We need these routes to be direct, and really for me the deviation parameter should be within like a 10% of the nearest main road, which is what we're highlighting here, as opposed to a straight line. Once it gets to kind of 20-40%, if you're looking at cycling level of service, that's taking you into a really low level of service, and they might necessarily pick up on that. So I think beyond 40%, if you're looking at like a wiggly woggly alternative route through residential streets, you might be creating oxbow lakes to finish the analogy there of straightness. So that's kind of what we do, but you've got this line and then that's the first stage. But what I really want to concentrate is what do these things actually look like and what do you actually put on the ground. I'm going to show like a few concepts that like some of them aren't tested, and I've kind of highlighted that. I've been working with the urban design group and getting together a kind of set of fairly standard new details to help with this, particularly when it comes to side roads and signal junctions where I think a lot of people are struggling about how they deal with these things. So I'm going to try and do a few ideas for that today. Let's crack on. Yeah, so the link design is fairly straightforward. I mean, we're talking about spare lanes, but traffic engineers will tell us no such thing as a spare lane. We've got it full with cars at the moment, or can we dedicate that space over to a more efficient use? So it's just a question of putting whatever you've got down there. The one I showed at the start had just cones in there. Here's an early concept I did just to show people what a mandatory cycle lane looks like with some flexi posts on it. You basically got a functioning physical distance strip there that pedestrians can step into and that cyclists can use for commuting trips or key worker trips, as it were. So pretty straightforward, and lots of those have been done now, particularly like this one in Kingston where they've kind of coned out a lane across Kingston Bridge, using it for cycle traffic. On the left there, you can see where the old cycle track was. It was like a kind of step track. Now that's all for the use of pedestrians, and a whole lane's taken out for the use of cyclists now the way. Absolutely fantastic stuff, I think, and very busy with cyclists and pedestrians now as well. So pretty straightforward on the links. Wanted to really talk about transitions. It's not like the most fun thing to talk about, but it's absolutely vital. What if there's a bit where you've got maybe a pedestrian refuge or an island in the middle of the road and you can't quite fit in any segregation for cyclists or any space? And we're going to come across a lot of these on some of the routes that are highlighted. I've shown a concept here of a kind of a priority ahead transition. There's obviously variants you can do. In the old days, we used to put end markings on the cycle lane, which basically warned the cyclist that a car was about to swing over into your place. I think if we want these routes to be used by people who are inexperienced, and we might want to up the level of service somewhat. So I've shown the cars actually having to give way before they merge with the cyclists. Note the use of the kind of larger symbols and the information plate. The narrow lanes do not overtake cyclists. For me, that's a kind of a good first stage. I'm already seeing people that kind of stop and start the routes to the other side. But if you've been fed through to a pinch point on the near side, and not giving any indication as a cyclist that cars are about to share that space, it could put a lot of people off using these routes. So there's a kind of concept to think about. There are kind of the variants as well. Coming across bus stops, for me, really, it's the shared bus border that there's quite a few of around the country now, particularly in London. I did some of the first ones in the UK, which is basically like that. We don't really want buses to be swinging into these pop-up cycle lanes and scaring the cyclists on the near side, not necessarily expecting that to happen. So in this case, if you kind of build the footway out, and I'll show you some. So what's happening there? But we'll carry on. Let's have a look at an example of one of those. Let's click over it. There we go. Back on target. This is a product that they produced in Spain and people have been using around the world. I know Transport for London have been using kind of asphalt fills on sand and getting a kind of similar effect. But I do like this as it's a kind of modular unit that you can put in, and we've got a whole raft of light segregation options that I've been helping develop for the last 4 or 5 years now. So I think this is quite good. So you can see the bus passengers step off onto that plate, means you've got the full height for accessibility. There's some kind of warning that cyclists might be going over there, that use of kind of checkerboard. We'll come back to that later. But you can see the buses aren't swinging in, they're stopping in the lane with traffic. People can use it safely, and cyclists don't have that risk of a large vehicle coming across their path. So these options are coming in. Hey, going past side roads, I've thrown in a concept, but still in the middle of the research to justify side road zebras in Greater Manchester. I'm hoping we can start that again. It had to pause for 3 months during the crisis, but I'm hoping we can very quickly make that point to the government who are still interested in working with us on this, and I'm appreciating the Department for Transport being involved in this. Here's a concept you could do, a kind of parallel crossing. If we can get that side road zebra, you could tie it in with the elephant footprints, and for me that's a really protective way of taking cyclists across. a side road, particularly if it's a wide side road. And a lot of the roads we're looking at have got big radius on their junctions. We need to do something to kind of protect cyclists in that space. Sorry, next one. If you don't want to wait and you're thinking of what to do right now, for me, the kind of best kind of temporary option is this one. This is from Enfield, where they've used the elephant footprints to kind of warn drivers coming in and out to expect cyclists in that position. It's the most conspicuous marking we have. It's not specifically designed for this purpose, but all it means is the cycle route goes that way. That's its legal meaning, which it does. But I think that's quite good. And I couldn't help doing a little bit of Photoshop just to make the case of what a parallel crossing could look like. For me, that's the clearest thing we can do to prioritise walking and cycling. So I'm hoping I can get there quick, particularly by the time the Trench 2 things start actually being built. That's my clock ticking. A couple of options for the junctions. I'm kind of running through these quick, I know, but short amount of time, happy to answer questions. Here's for me, like the least we should do if we're approaching a major signalised junction. It's the kind of Danish style mixing zone where the cars, if you imagine where we are looking at this perspective, that's the kind of car view, they're told to give way on the approach to the junction. And the concept of a mixing zone is that you manage the conflict on the approach to the front stop line, rather than the light goes green and everybody cuts across each other, and that's the risk of like the number one fatality of a cyclist, the left hook. In this case, cyclists arriving from that near side in the pop-up cycle lane will get priority to move through into a more defensive central position so they can go straight ahead, and you get more aware that cars will be moving over to the left there. If we just feed people through on the near side and they wait for that green light, thinking they're protected and move off, and then cars are hooking across them, that's a real problem. We certainly don't want any collisions on any of these rapid cycleways. That's one idea. A more outlandish but like potentially doable concept is to kind of look at a kind of protected style junction for cyclists. There's a big international movement on this. It's the more Dutch style approach. So I've shown a Danish. Here's a kind of Dutch one. The use of colourful crossings to like imply a priority for pedestrians whenever they choose to cross, because they might want to gather round in large clumps on the side roads there waiting to get across. They might want to wait for that green man, and most pedestrians don't wait for the green man. They cross, and they're perfectly entitled to. For me, this gives the driver some kind of warning to expect that. And from a cycling perspective, you can see the pole on the near side that's kind of protecting cyclists from the van. Cyclists will have kind of 4 options in this kind of scenario. They could have moved out and got themselves positionally in line with that van so they could just go straight ahead, as a bikeability instructor might say you can do. You can kind of like go through on the near side and avoid that protection that putting them out of the junction, so just go through and hope that the car doesn't turn across you. Or the kind of green area is the kind of the waiting area, the kind of refuge, as you will, for those people that aren't necessarily used to taking on big signal junctions. There's somewhere safe to kind of pull over and have a full view of the junction while you're waiting to see when it's the safest time to cross. So perhaps you might let the left turners turn across you and then wait for a kind of safe point at which you'll go across at your own speed. Or the kind of final option, which we're hoping people don't take, but you know, it's still there, to dismount and just go across with pedestrians and enjoy the priority that the colourful crossing goes. So that's painting stuff around, putting poles in, not changing any of the signal junction approaches. So for me, that's a concept that is definitely worth trying out. I think if we do nothing and we're really enticing people with the links, but we're not protecting at the junctions, that could be a big problem. I think that's my last slide. So I'll hand it over to questions. Yeah.
Hello, Brian. Excellent. Thank you ever so much. So thanks to all of our presenters, speakers this morning. It's been a fascinating session. Can I just check, Jeremy, can you hear us? And can you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yeah, hearing you loud and clear. I'm pleased that we've got that resolved. So we're moving into the final session now, which is Q&A. I would just like to invite the panelists that have got a webcam to please turn it on. Joey, who is Robin's colleague at University of Leeds, is going to be facilitating the Q&A. He's been moderating the inbox during the broadcast, and I can see that there's been lots and lots of questions come in. So Joey, are you there? Let's hope so. Maybe not. Okay.
Hello,
Well,
yes, I am here.
excellent. There. Okay, so Joey's going to be asking some of the questions that came in to the panel. Can I just confirm as well, Rupert, you're still with us?
Yes, I am indeed, Daniel. Hello.
Excellent. So let's kick off the Q&A and pass you over to Joey now.
Okay, well, we've had all kinds of different questions coming in. Let's start off with something. Okay, we've got a question from Kenneth Timmis about, I think this will be for Jeremy. So it's what priority evidence from this tool will have in relation to local knowledge, and so he's given an example from Derby, highlighting where the tool highlights the A52, which is a dual carriageway, which is perhaps unsuitable for cycling, and how the evidence from the tool will relate to other kind of local knowledge. Robin might also want to talk about this.
Maybe. Thanks, Joey. So just sorry, I didn't get the name of the best person who asked, but I think it's Kenneth. Hi. So from my perspective, we're not requiring people to use this tool. This is something which we produce to help people. So we're not. I don't think it's the place for the department to say what weight to place on this compared to local knowledge. As Robin said, there are a number of local factors which might mean the ranking of new cycleways proposed by the tool might not be the best thing for a local area. And so one thing that we flagged up is that actually potentially there's a safety risk associated with putting some kind of light segregation for a new cycleway alongside a very fast-moving road. That for that reason, we flagged up in the model the speed limit associated with with putting new cycleways along certain routes, so that decision makers such as yourself can make an informed decision about whether this looks to be a sensible route for a priority route for new cycleways or not. Robin, do you have anything further to add?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a very good point, and I just wanted to flag the design decisions that went into the results. So we did notice that some fairly big roads were getting flagged. Notably, the Queensway Tunnel in Liverpool is one that multiple people have commented on. And initially, Joey and I, we created a system that manually removed roads that we said that's probably not appropriate. However, having given it more thought and discussed it with multiple people, we wanted not to have any kind of manual intervention in the results. It is what it is, and it's flagging the network. And as long as we would rather that people understand where the results are coming from than deliberately manually remove some roads from the results. And we also looked at the strategic road network, and I'm aware that this is another issue, that there are some roads in the results that aren't controlled by local authorities, they're controlled by Highways England, and we could have manually removed them. But we think that the more that we can minimize altering, making these changes, because once you start making manual changes, the question is, where do you stop, and do people know about those changes that you're making? So that links to the design decisions that went into the tools. And another thing to flag is that on roads that have a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit or more, there may be there certainly are issues around safety, and that also links to another kind of intervention, which is speed limit reductions. And I heard anecdotal evidence that on the A56 in Greater Manchester, there's been a speed limit reduction from 40 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour, alongside the creation of a trial cycleway that could become permanent. So I think rather than just having a blanket, we cannot flag any road of a certain type, we want to flag it, but flag that there may be issues with it that may lead to alternative ways of dealing with it. And I just also want to reinforce Jeremy's point that, of course, this is only one tool in a wide range of evidence sources that should feed into the results. So yeah, the more you understand of the kind of limitations in the data, the better, and look at the wide range of options, not just those flagged by the tool.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, so we have quite a few different questions here coming in, but I've got one on kind of how this relates to so we've got a question from Mike Ginger. How does the business case development fit with WebTag and its emphasis on time savings for drivers? Our local authority says they can't reduce capacity because it would undermine WebTag bus case development. So that's perhaps for Rupert.
Well, if it's okay, actually, I might ask Jeremy to take that one, if that's all right.
Okay.
As he's perhaps closer to WebTag than I am. Is that okay, Jeremy? Are you happy to say something on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of how we're going to be reviewing the cases, I think the important thing to stress is that, as Rupert said at the beginning, that the purpose of the fund is seeking meaningful road reallocation to active travel. So as part of the reviewing the strategic case, we'll be looking for those measures which actually achieve that goal. In terms of the economic appraisal assessing value for money, so the purpose of value for money is to assess the overall impact of an intervention, considering all of the costs and benefits and the winners and losers across society. So as part of the economic appraisal, we want to understand that the benefits that this will achieve in terms of increasing active travel and the health benefits and environmental impacts and so forth. We are also interested in understanding if there are significant. As part of the economic case, we will want to understand if there are the scale of impact of congestion impacts for motorists, and that will be factored into the value for money assessment. We'll be assessing the scale of the bids both on their strategic case to they meet this objective, but also in terms of the economic case. Does this represent a kind of welfare improvement for all of society, taking into account not just impacts for cyclists, but also for other road users as well.
Okay, brilliant. We've had quite a few questions relating to how cycling potentials are calculated. I think this will be good for Robin. So questions about whether the cycling potentials listed are total potentials or the increase that we could expect, whether it's focused on destinations as in town centres or wider journeys, and in terms of the kilometre cycles, kilometres cycled, how that relates to the length of trips and health benefits associated, and yeah, kind of how kilometres cycled is calculated. So yeah, it might be useful to just talk about cycling potential a bit more.
Great, yeah, so very happy to take that question. Is it possible, Daniel, to do another very quick screen share to help illustrate my answer?
I'm pretty sure that that could be done. I'm just going to switch over to you now. Oh,
Okay.
colleague has already done it. There you are.
So yeah, that I think it's key to understand where these numbers of cycling potential come from, and we are very much extending on the propensity to cycle tool here. So this is prior work done by myself and colleagues from University of Westminster, University of Cambridge, and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And the first thing to say is that we're using the government target scenario, which represents a doubling in cycling compared with the 2011 baseline in the cycleway prioritisation tool. So we are seeing a increase that is, I'd say, a moderate increase, but there are other scenarios available, including this, which is the Go Dutch scenario, which represents, I think, a longer term scenario if we're aiming to really transform the transport system to enable as much active transport as possible. But I'm going to use this to illustrate how cycling potential is calculated and what it means. So it calculates cycling potential across the whole road network, and at the moment I'm showing the commuter layer on the propensity to cycle tool. So in answer to the second question, which was about, is it taking into account city centres, what are the trip attractors used, it takes into account all origins and destinations across the entire road network. So you can see here that this result is calculated for all regions across the UK, and technically the specifics is this is origin destination pairs between lower super output areas, and the numbers refer to the number of people who are already making those trips between origin and destination who could switch to cycling under a scenario of change. So I think that relates to the first question, which was, what do those numbers mean? Are they totals or increases? We are looking at totals in a world where the government target has been met. And I think it's interesting, I've seen data from some cycle counters that show a doubling in cycling in some areas. So I think that this is a near-term scenario of change, that the results that we're seeing in the cycleway prioritization toolkit, which take the data from the propensity to cycle tool. Another subtlety about those results is that it's talking about the number of people who could use a cycleway in one direction. So if you've got a count on a particular road, that's how many people could use it in either direction. So if you're trying to get the total daily counts, you would have to double it to represent the cycling happening in both directions during working hours. And then remember that this is only picking up the commute. In this particular layer, this is only picking up work days. So work days tend to correspond to school travel days. I wanted to show the results for the travel to school layer, which is actually quite different. It's a much more diffuse layer because schools don't cluster right in the city centre in the same way that jobs do. And I think that the kinds of intervention that are suitable for a travel safe routes to school are different from the kind of big arterial routes that the cycleway prioritization tool is designed to pick up on. So that, I think, is the second question. And then in terms of the kilometers cycled and health benefits, I think that's a really good question. So obviously there will be a greater health benefit if you cycle further. So that would, to some extent, encourage longer distance cycleways and a network that is encouraging people to go beyond, say, 3, 4, 5 kilometers to get a good amount of daily exercise. And we can take that into account in the propensity to cycle tool, but and the way you can take that into account is by weighting it in using these buttons on the right hand side. But time is of the essence, so I won't do a live demo of that, but the short answer is no, we're not taking account of that subtlety that longer distance trips will lead to greater health benefits in the cycleway prioritisation. So I think that's answers to all of those three very good cycling potential questions.
Brilliant. Okay. So
Joe,
here's another one.
Joe, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions, okay?
Right. Okay. Well, I'll just pick out a couple that should be fairly quick then. So I've got one from Lee Bailey, which is in terms of funding, understandably we're told schemes have to be implemented within tight deadlines. But the problem I've found is that suppliers are struggling to provide segregation products. And is there any room for movement on this?
Yeah, shall I? It's Rupert here. Shall I pick that one up? I mean, it's an issue that we have that has been flagged with us already. That because there is such a demand now for some of these products, like including the kind of wands and the temporary segregation measures and so on. That it's either hard to get hold of them at all, or the prices have gone up. I'd like to think the department will be pragmatic on this. I mean, clearly we've said in our expectation is that authorities will deliver these schemes very quickly, because that's what it's all about, and that we will reserve the right to sort of claw back funding, if you like, if schemes aren't delivered quickly. But all I can say is, I'd like to think the department will take a pragmatic approach to this. We do recognise that there are problems in the supply chain at the moment.
Yeah, I might just add, I've talked to a lot of the suppliers, and that there's kind of international options as well that we could use. So happy to help with that.
Okay, one very quick question that several people have asked is whether the slides and talks will be available as videos or presentations afterwards.
Yes, yes, they will be. So the recording will be automatically emailed out to everyone that's registered in the next few hours.
Right. Do we have time for any others?
Should we take one more, Joey?
Okay. So we've got some questions about the types of measures we've seen on some of Brian's slides. Can these be put as can these be legally introduced as an experimental intervention? And what are the kind of lane widths that are possible at different speed limits? Some quite technical stuff in terms of how you can do, what you can do.
Yeah, I can say that. Yeah. The only, sorry, Joey, you still gonna. The only one I showed that was potentially difficult legally was the side road zebra, and I think I made a bit of a point about that. But the use of everything else I showed in there was possible within our regulations, albeit some are kind of untried in the UK. So if you're thinking of doing some, by all means, come to me and I'll just advise you on how I think the layout should work and what would work best. And there's other people that can help out in that as well. So that really, in terms of the lane widths, that's why I feel like the potential flow, the doubling the potential is so important. So you can kind of apportion it out accurately. But as an engineer, you want a range anyway. Sometimes you might just be upgrading a cycle lane that's already there and putting some kind of physical objects in it, so you can guarantee that the through cars will stay out of it. And that's a much different level of service than just leaving an advisory cycle lane that's there at the moment. Whereas other times, if you've got space, and going back to the previous question about buses, you might want to lay out 4.5, 5 meters, and that's your potential bus network. There's nothing stopping you do a cycle lane inside a bus lane if you did want to test that out. So you could look at prioritising walking, cycling, and public transport during this in the same space. So Yeah, speed's one thing, the actual speed limit, but it's design speed. As soon as like a temporary cone's going there, then speeds drop anyway because people know, and you back that up with the messaging, the signs, and the COVID warning ones. That should reduce speeds, and that's certainly the case we're seeing in Manchester where we've done some of these things. So you've got to be working to a 30 mile an hour design speed, and if the speeds are going up beyond that, even after the temporary stuff going in there, you might need to speak to the police and do some enforcement that way, because it's not suitable for that situation, no matter what the limit is. That answered most of them, I think.
Thanks. I think we've overrun by 7 or 8 minutes now, so I think now is probably a good time to come to a close. We have had many more questions, and what I will do after this broadcast is circulate those questions to all of the panelists, and we'll endeavour to sort through as quickly as possible to come back to everyone that didn't have their question answered. So thanks ever so much for everyone who has spoken today. Rupert and Jeremy from DFT, Robin from University of Leeds, Brian at Urban Movement, and yeah, special thanks to Joey for helping to sort through all those questions. It's not an easy task at all. So thanks ever so much, and hopefully our attendees are giving you a round of applause from wherever they are today. Just another reminder, we will be hosting a follow-up to this event next Wednesday, kicking off at 10:30 AM on the 24th of June, the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit, or AMAT user guidance session. You will be able to see the registration link hopefully on your browser now, but if not, you can visit transportextra.com and the events page. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the recording of this event will be emailed out to everyone shortly. It'll also be made available on YouTube and Transport Extra as well. So thanks everyone, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
So